The sprawling empire of Horizon Logistics stretched across the Midwest like a web of steel and concrete, a testament to one woman's relentless ambition. Mara Ellison had founded the company 15 years ago with nothing but a beat-up delivery van, a handwritten business plan, and a fire in her belly that refused to be extinguished. She'd started as a one-woman operation, hauling packages through snowstorms and negotiating deals with skeptical suppliers over lukewarm coffee. Now, Horizon boasted 18 warehouses, a fleet of trucks, and a workforce of over 2,000. From her sleek office atop a glass tower in Chicago, Mara had traded her steel-toed boots for designer heels, her days of manual labor replaced by strategy sessions and shareholder meetings. Yet, despite the glossy success, a gnawing unease had settled into her bones. The numbers didn't lie, revenue was steady, profits were up, but the reports filtering in from her regional directors felt too polished, too perfect. Customer satisfaction scores were dipping, complaints about late deliveries and damaged goods were trickling through online reviews, and employee turnover had spiked to an all-time high. Her managers insisted it was just growing pains, the inevitable hiccups of expansion. But Mara hadn't built Horizon by trusting polished assurances. She'd built it by digging into the dirt herself. So, when the unease refused to fade, she made a decision that would have stunned her board of directors: she'd go undercover in her own company. Mara didn't tell a soul, not her COO, not her assistant, not even her husband, who'd long grown used to her unpredictable streaks. She crafted a new identity, Maggie Carter, a down-on-her-luck divorcee looking for a fresh start. She traded her tailored blazers for a thrift store jacket, dyed her chestnut hair a mousy blonde, and swapped her contacts for a pair of scratched-up glasses. To complete the disguise, she applied for a grunt-level job at the Horizon warehouse in Rockford, Illinois, a facility 2 hours from headquarters, where no one would recognize the CEO's face from annual reports or company newsletters. The hiring process was a farce. She showed up at the warehouse with a fake resume and a nervous smile, expecting at least a cursory interview. Instead, a harried supervisor named Tony barely glanced at her paperwork before tossing her a faded orange vest and a handheld scanner. "You ever worked a warehouse before?" he asked, chewing gum like it was a full-time job. Mara nodded, keeping her story simple. "A little, years ago." Tony shrugged. "Good enough. Stick with the crew, don't break anything, and you'll be fine. No background check, no training manual, just a barked order to get moving," as he shuffled off to yell at someone else. Mara stood there, scanner in hand, feeling a mix of disbelief and grim determination. If this was how they onboard people, no wonder things were falling apart. The warehouse was a labyrinth of towering shelves and rumbling machinery, a symphony of chaos that assaulted her senses the moment she stepped onto the floor. Cardboard boxes teetered in precarious stacks, some crushed at the corners as if they'd been dropped from a height. Forklifts roared past with little regard for safety lanes, their drivers shouting over the din to be heard. Workers shuffled through the aisles, their faces etched with exhaustion, some moved with robotic precision, others dragged their feet like they were counting down the minutes to freedom. Mara's first assignment was to join a small team unpacking a shipment of electronics, and she quickly fell into step, keeping her head down but her eyes sharp. That's when she noticed him, Javier Torres, a wiry young man with a mop of dark hair and a uniform that hung off his frame like it belonged to someone twice his size. He couldn't have been more than 22, but his eyes carried the weight of someone much older. Javier worked with a quiet intensity, sorting packages at a pace that put the rest of the team to shame. Yet there was something off about him, a nervous twitch in his shoulders, a quick glance over his shoulder whenever Tony's voice boomed across the floor. Mara watched him out of the corner of her eye, intrigued by the contradiction, a kid who worked like his life depended on it but moved like he was hiding something. The real revelation came at lunch. The break room was a dingy space with flickering fluorescent lights and a chipped table that wobbled under the weight of a microwave. Most workers pulled out Tupperware or grabbed something from the vending machine, grumbling about the prices. Mara sat near the back, nibbling on a granola bar she'd brought as part of her Maggie persona, and observed. Javier didn't join the others. He lingered near the edge of the room, hands stuffed in his pockets, staring at the vending machine with a look of quiet resignation. Then, as the chatter rose and attention drifted, he made his move. Mara almost missed it. Javier darted a glance around, then sidled up to a trash can near the microwave. With a practiced motion, he reached in and fished out a crumpled paper bag. Inside was half a turkey sandwich, discarded by someone who'd taken a few bites and tossed the rest. He smoothed out the bag, inspected the sandwich with the care of a jeweler appraising a gem, and took a small, deliberate bite. Mara's stomach twisted, not with disgust, but with a pang of something she couldn't name. She'd seen hunger before, back in her early days when she'd skipped meals to make rent, but this was different. This was desperation wearing a Horizon vest. She couldn't sit still. Abandoning her granola bar, she crossed the room and slid onto the bench across from him, keeping her voice low. "Hey, you good?" Javier froze, the sandwich halfway to his mouth, his dark eyes wide with panic. I wasn't stealing," he stammered, crumbs clinging to his lips. "It was in the trash, I swear." Mara held up a hand, softening her tone. "I'm not here to snitch. Just checking on you." He stared at her, suspicion warring with exhaustion, then shrugged. "I'm fine. Payday's tomorrow. I'll manage." Mara leaned in, careful not to push too hard. "You don't have anything to eat till then?" Javier's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he'd shut down. Then he let out a bitter chuckle. "Not after bills. And my sister's meds. It's just how it is." He looked away, chewing slowly, as if savoring every bite might make it last longer. Mara's chest tightened. This wasn't just a kid skipping lunch, this was a systemic failure, and it was happening under her watch. Before she could press further, Tony's voice cut through the room like a whip. "Torres. Break's over, move it." Javier stuffed the sandwich into his pocket, gave Mara a quick nod, and bolted back to the floor. She watched him go, her mind racing. One worker eating from the trash was a tragedy, a warehouse full of them was a betrayal of everything she'd built Horizon to be. She'd come here to uncover the truth, and now that she'd glimpsed it, she couldn't unsee it. Something was rotting in her company, and Mara Ellison, or Maggie Carter, was going to root it out, no matter what it took. Mara Ellison, or Maggie Carter, as her faded name tag proclaimed, returned to the warehouse floor with a fire simmering beneath her calm exterior. The lunchroom scene with Javier replayed in her mind like a looped reel, the crumpled sandwich, the hollow resignation in his voice, the way he'd flinched when Tony barked his name. She'd built Horizon Logistics to be a lifeline for people like her, scrappy, determined, overlooked, but what she'd seen so far was a machine grinding its workers into dust. As she hefted boxes onto a conveyor belt, her hands moved on autopilot while her eyes and ears worked overtime, cataloging every detail of the chaos around her. The Rockford warehouse was a pressure cooker. The air thrummed with the whine of machinery and the sharp clang of metal carts slamming into racks. Workers darted between aisles, their orange vests streaked with sweat and grime, while supervisors prowled the edges like wolves circling a herd. Mara noticed the rhythm, or lack of it. Orders piled up faster than the team could process them, yet half the stations stood empty, their scanners dark and abandoned. She overheard snippets of grumbled conversations. "They cut my hours again," one worker muttered. "I told them I can't lift that much, but they don't care," another hissed. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was a bone-deep weariness that hung over the place like a fog. Her sorting team included Javier, a wiry woman named Keisha with a no-nonsense braid, and an older man named Hank who coughed into his sleeve every few minutes. Keisha was the first to break the silence as they wrestled with a tangle of mislabeled packages. "You newbies always start out quiet," she said, glancing at Mara with a wry smile. "Give it a week, you'll be griping with the rest of us." Mara forced a chuckle, keeping her cover intact. "Seems like there's plenty to gripe about." Keisha snorted. "Understatement of the year. You see that stack over there?" She jerked her chin toward a tower of boxes teetering near the loading dock. "Been sitting there 3 days. No one's got time to move it, and Tony'll blame us when it falls." Mara's gaze flicked to the stack, then to Tony, who was leaning against a wall, scrolling through his phone while barking half-hearted orders. "Doesn't he help out?" she asked, testing the waters. Hank let out a raspy laugh that dissolved into a cough. "Help? Tony? Nah, he's too busy playing King of the Hill. You'll see." Javier stayed silent, his focus locked on the scanner, but Mara caught the tightening of his jaw. There was a story there, and she intended to unearth it. The real crack in the facade came an hour later. A worker across the floor, a lanky guy named Dion, misjudged a turn with his cart and clipped a shelf. A single box of kitchenware slid off and hit the concrete with a dull thud, spilling pots and lids in a clattering mess. Before Dion could even react, Tony was on him like a vulture. "What the hell, Dion? You think this is a damn playground?" he bellowed, his gums snapping with every word. Dion scrambled to gather the pieces, his face flushed. "It slipped, man, I didn't mean," Tony cut him off, jabbing a finger in his chest. "Slipped? That's $80 worth of merchandise, and it's coming out of your check. Maybe next time you'll watch where you're going." Mara stiffened, her hands pausing mid-sort. She glanced at Keisha, who muttered under her breath, "Same old song and dance." Hank shook his head but kept working, his cough punctuating the tension. Javier's eyes darted to Tony, then back to his scanner, his movements faster, almost frantic. Mara couldn't stay quiet. "Wait," she said, stepping forward, her voice low but firm. "That's not right. It was an accident, shouldn't the company eat the loss?" Tony wheeled on her, his glare narrowing. "Who are you, the union rep? Mind your business, newbie. That's how it works here, screw up, you pay." Dion shot her a grateful look but said nothing, his shoulders slumping as he shoved the dented box aside. Tony stormed off, leaving a ripple of unease in his wake. Mara turned to Keisha, keeping her tone casual. "They do that a lot? Doc pay for stuff like that?" Keisha nodded, her braid swinging as she hefted a crate. "All the time. Last month, they took $50 off me 'cause a label printed wrong. Wasn't even my fault, the machine's older than dirt." Hank chimed in, his voice gravelly. "They'll nickel and dime you till you're broke. Then they act surprised when folks quit." Mara's mind churned. This wasn't just poor management, it was a pattern, a deliberate squeeze on workers who were already stretched thin. She needed more. Later, during a brief water break, she sidled up to Javier near the loading dock, where he was chugging from a dented bottle. "Hey," she said, keeping her voice soft. "That thing with Dion, is that normal?" Javier wiped his mouth, his gaze skittering away. "Yeah. Normal as it gets." She pressed gently. "Ever happen to you?" He hesitated, then nodded once, sharply. "Couple weeks back. Forklift hit a pallet I was stacking, bent some frames. Tony said it was my fault, took $120. Said I should have moved faster." Her stomach twisted. "That's not legal, is it?" Javier's laugh was dry, humorless. "Legal don't matter here. You fight it, they cut your hours till you shut up. Or worse." Mara frowned. "Worse how?" He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "You really want to know?" She nodded, holding his gaze. He exhaled, leaning against a crate. "They've got this thing, call it a favor. You're short on cash, Tony or one of his guys offers you a loan. Quick money, no questions. But it's a trap. Interest piles up, and if you can't pay, they dock your check or slash your shifts. Keeps you stuck. Mara's pulse quickened. A loan shark racket, inside her own company? You ever take one? She asked, careful not to sound accusatory. Javier's jaw clenched. Once. For my sister's meds. Took me 3 months to climb out, and I'm still behind. He kicked at the ground, frustration radiating off him. You don't get it, till you're in it, by then, it's too late. She wanted to dig deeper, but the break ended, and Javier slipped back into the fray. Mara spent the rest of the shift watching Tony and his second-in-command, a wiry guy named Vic who smirked more than he spoke. She caught them huddled near the office later, voices low but sharp. Payroll's tight again, Vic said, lighting a cigarette. Tony grinned, popping his gum. Good. Told corporate we're overstaffed, shaved a few grand off the budget. They'll thank me later. Vic chuckled. And Dion's little spill? Tony shrugged. Another lesson learned. Keeps them scared. Mara's fists clenched in her pockets. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was exploitation, a calculated grind to bleed her workers dry while padding the numbers for headquarters. She'd seen enough to know the rot went deeper than one warehouse, but she needed proof, something concrete to dismantle the whole damn system. That night, as the shift ended, she lingered near the lockers, pretending to fumble with her vest. Tony and Vic's voices drifted from the office, their laughter cutting through the hum of the fluorescents. She edged closer, catching fragments. Next week's cuts, keep them guessing. HR won't blink. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a glitch, it was a playbook. And Mara Ellison wasn't about to let it stand. She'd come here as Maggie Carter to uncover the truth, but she was leaving with a mission, to burn this corruption to the ground and rebuild Horizon from the ashes. The question was how, and how far up the chain it went. By the third day, Mara Ellison, still cloaked as Maggie Carter, felt the weight of the warehouse settle into her bones. The air was thick with dust and the sour tang of sweat, the kind of atmosphere that clung to your skin and dulled your senses. She'd come to Rockford expecting cracks in the system, but what she'd uncovered was a gaping wound, a predatory ecosystem thriving under her company's banner. Tony and Vic weren't just bad apples, they were architects of a scheme that turned Horizon Logistics into a millstone around its workers' necks. Every shift revealed more, docked paychecks, slashed hours, whispered threats, and Mara's resolve hardened into something unyielding. She wasn't just gathering evidence anymore, she was plotting a reckoning. The morning started with a jolt. Mara arrived early, her thrift store jacket zipped against the chill, and found the loading dock buzzing with tension. A shipment of high-end appliances had come in overnight, but half the boxes were mangled, cardboard split, corners crushed, a few leaking styrofoam crumbs onto the concrete. The crew gathered around, muttering curses, while Tony stormed in, his gum chewing replaced by a scowl. Who the hell signed off on this? He barked, kicking a dented box. Keisha, who'd been on the night shift, raised a hand wearily. I did. Truck came late, driver said it was already banged up. I logged it like always. Tony rounded on her, his voice a snarl. Logged it? You think that's gonna save your ass? This is $2,000 worth of damage, and I'm not eating it. Keisha's face tightened, but she stood her ground. I didn't load the truck, Tony. Check the manifest, it's on the supplier. He sneered, stepping closer. Supplier, my ass. You should have caught it before it hit the dock. That's $500 off your check, maybe next time you'll open your eyes. The crew went silent, a collective flinch rippling through them. Mara's pulse spiked, but she kept her head down, stacking a pallet while her mind raced. $500, for a single mom like Keisha, that wasn't just a hit, it was a gut punch. The injustice gnawed at her, but she needed more than outrage. She needed leverage. Throughout the shift, she watched Tony and Vic like a hawk, noting their habits, their blind spots. Tony ruled through bluster, stomping around with his clipboard like a petty dictator, while Vic was quieter, sharper, a snake coiled in the shadows. She caught them slipping into the office mid-morning, the door left ajar just enough for her to linger nearby, pretending to wrestle with a jammed scanner. Their voices drifted out, low and conspiratorial. "Corporate's asking questions about turnover," Vic said, his tone clipped. Tony snorted. "Let M ask. Told M it's lazy kids jumping ship, numbers still look good, don't they?" Vic paused, then, "Yeah, but they're sniffing around labor costs. We gotta keep the cuts quiet, blame it on efficiency." Mara's jaw clenched. Efficiency. That's what they called starving their workers to juice the bottom line. She edged away before they noticed, her mind spinning. The rot wasn't just local, it was feeding false reports up the chain, straight to her desk in Chicago. She'd trusted those numbers, those sanitized summaries, while her people were drowning. The guilt was a bitter pill, but it fueled her next move. She needed hard proof, records, emails, something that couldn't be explained away with a shrug and a smirk. Her chance came late in the afternoon. A forklift malfunction sent Tony and Vic scrambling to the far end of the warehouse, leaving the office unguarded. Mara slipped inside, heart pounding, and locked the door behind her. The room was a sty, coffee-stained papers strewn across a desk, a flickering monitor casting a sickly glow. She didn't have long. She logged into the computer with a generic admin password she'd guessed from years of overseeing IT protocols, sloppy security, another failure on her watch, and pulled up the payroll system. What she found turned her stomach. The records were a maze of deductions and adjustments, each tagged with vague codes: damaged goods, overtime adjustment, performance penalty. Keisha's file showed the $500 hit from that morning, alongside smaller cuts stretching back months, $30 here, $70 there, whittling her pay to a skeleton. Javier's was worse, a $120 deduction from the forklift incident, plus a string of loan repayments that shaved off half his earnings every cycle. Hank, Dion, dozens of others, all bled dry by a system rigged to keep them desperate. Mara cross-referenced the shift logs, hours slashed at random, often after a worker complained or fell behind. It wasn't chaos, it was control. She dug deeper, opening an email client Tony had left logged in. The inbox was a goldmine. Messages to Vic outlined the playbook: push the damage fees, keeps M scared, one read. Another to a regional manager bragged, trimmed overtime by 20%, blamed demand. Numbers look clean. A thread with someone named R. Callahan at headquarters caught her eye, tersely worded approvals for budget cuts, no questions asked. Mara's blood ran cold. Callahan was her CFO, a man she'd trusted to keep Horizon's finances tight but fair. Had he known? Or was he just swallowing Tony's lies whole? She snapped photos of the screen with her burner phone, hands trembling but steady enough to capture every damning line. She was about to log out when footsteps thudded outside. "Maggie! You in there?" It was Hank's gravelly voice, tinged with panic. She shut down the system, unlocked the door, and slipped out just as Tony rounded the corner, his glare locking onto her. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Mara held up her scanner, feigning frustration. Thing froze again, thought the office had a spare. Tony's eyes narrowed, but Hank coughed loudly, drawing his attention. "Forklifts fixed, boss. Needs your sign-off." Tony grunted and stomped off, leaving Mara to exhale a shaky breath. She couldn't stay quiet any longer. At the end of the shift, she found Javier near the lockers, his face drawn and pale. "Hey," she said, keeping her voice low. "Those loans Tony gives out, how bad is it?" He studied her, suspicion flickering, then sighed. Bad. You borrow $200, you owe $300 in a month. Miss a payment, they take it from your check, plus extra. My sister's asthma flared up last year, I had no choice. Now I'm barely breaking even. Mara's chest ached. And if you tell someone? Javier's laugh was hollow. Who? HR's a joke, Tony's buddy runs it here. You're stuck, till you're broke or gone. That was it, the final straw. Mara waited until the warehouse quieted, then made her move. She marched to the office, where Tony and Vic were counting cash from a lockbox, petty cash, or something shadier, she didn't care. She knocked once, hard, and pushed in. Tony looked up, annoyed. What now? Mara pulled off her glasses, letting her dyed hair fall loose, and met his gaze with the steel of the woman who'd built Horizon from nothing. We're done playing, she said, voice like a blade. I'm Mara Ellison. This is my company, and I've seen everything. Tony blinked, then laughed, a nervous edge to it. Nice try, lady. You're delusional. Vic paled, recognition dawning as Mara pulled out her phone and flashed a Horizon ID from her real email, the one Tony wouldn't dare question. You've been stealing from my workers, faking reports, running loans like a damn mobster. You're finished. Tony's bravado cracked, his gum falling silent. Vic stammered, we didn't, Mara cut him off. Save it. Keys, now. She held out her hand, unyielding. Tony slapped his keyring into her palm, his face a mask of fury and fear. She stepped back, pocketing the keys. Security's on its way. You're out, both of you. As they scrambled to grab their things, Mara's mind was already racing ahead. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a purge. She'd tear this corruption out root and stem, starting tonight. The air in the Rockford warehouse felt different the next morning, thinner, somehow, as if the weight of Tony and Vic's reign had lifted, leaving a tentative stillness in its wake. Mara Ellison stood at the edge of the loading dock, no longer hiding behind Maggie Carter's thrift store disguise. Her hair was back to its natural chestnut, swept into a tight bun, and she wore a crisp blazer over jeans, a blend of the CEO she'd become and the scrappy founder she'd never stopped being. The workers trickled in for the morning shift, their faces a mix of wariness and curiosity. Word had spread fast, the new hire wasn't a hire at all, but the woman whose name graced the company logo. Some whispered in disbelief, others avoided her gaze, unsure if this was salvation or just another storm brewing. Mara didn't waste time. She called the entire shift, nearly 50 workers, into the break room before the clock hit 7 a.m. The space was too small, forcing people to lean against walls or perch on rickety chairs, but no one complained. She stood at the front, hands clasped, and let the silence settle before speaking. I owe you all an apology, she began, her voice steady but raw. I built Horizon to be a place where hard work paid off, where people like me, people like you, could get a fair shot. Somewhere along the line, I lost sight of that. I trusted the wrong people, and you paid the price. A murmur rippled through the room, surprise, skepticism, a few cautious nods. Keisha crossed her arms, her braid swinging as she tilted her head, waiting. Javier stood near the back, hands in his pockets, his tired eyes locked on Mara. She took a breath and continued. I came here undercover because I knew something was wrong. What I found was worse than I imagined, illegal deductions, predatory loans, hours cut to keep you desperate. That ends today. She paused, letting the words sink in. Tony and Vic are gone, fired last night. Security escorted them out, and they're not coming back. The room erupted, gasps, a few cheers, a burst of relieved laughter from Hank that dissolved into a coughing fit. Mara raised a hand, silencing them. But it's not enough to cut out the rot. I've seen the payroll records, the emails, the lies they fed up the chain. If you've had money taken from your checks, damages, penalties, whatever, you're getting it back. Full back pay, no exceptions, starting this week. The murmurs turned to stunned chatter, disbelief giving way to flickers of hope. Keisha's arms dropped, her mouth parting slightly. Dion, still smarting from his $80 hit, cracked a hesitant smile. Mara wasn't done. We're restructuring this warehouse from the ground up. New management, someone who's worked the floor, not a suit who's never lifted a box, starts Monday. Schedules will be fair, predictable, no more random cuts. And I'm setting up a direct line to me. Not HR, not some middleman, me. You've got a problem, you tell me, and I'll fix it. No retaliation, no fear. She scanned the room, meeting their eyes. I know trust doesn't come easy after what you've been through. I'm not asking you to believe me yet, I'm asking you to watch me prove it. The applause started slow, Hank clapping first, then Keisha joining in, followed by a wave that rolled through the group. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real, a fragile bridge between Mara and the people she'd failed. She stepped aside, gesturing to a table where she'd set out coffee and donuts, a small gesture, but one Tony had never bothered with. As the workers grabbed cups and milled around, she pulled Javier aside. His hands shook slightly as he held a coffee, the steam curling around his face. You okay? She asked quietly. He nodded, then hesitated. I don't know what to say. That back pay, my sister's meds, his voice cracked, and he looked away. Mara reached into her blazer, pulled out $300 in cash, her own money, not Horizon's, and pressed it into his hand. For now, she said. No more trash, Javier. You hear me? His throat bobbed as he took it, whispering, thanks. She clapped his shoulder, a rare moment of softness breaking through her steel. The day wasn't over. Mara spent hours in the office, digging through the digital wreckage Tony and Vic had left behind. With her master credentials, she accessed everything, payroll, emails, even security footage she'd requested from IT overnight. The footage showed Tony pocketing cash from the lockbox, Vic intimidating workers into signing loan slips, a catalog of petty cruelties that made her fists clench. She forwarded it all to her legal team with a single instruction: prosecute. This wasn't just about firing them, it was about justice. By afternoon, she'd called an emergency meeting with her Chicago execs via video link. The screen filled with familiar faces, her COO, her CFO, Art Callahan, and half a dozen others who'd grown fat on Horizon success. She didn't mince words. We've got a cancer in this company, and it's been spreading under your noses, or with your help. Callahan flinched, his ties suddenly too tight. She laid out the evidence, faked reports, budget cuts that starved the warehouses, an HR department that rubber-stamped complaints into oblivion. I want audits on every facility, top to bottom. Anyone complicit is out. No severance, no mercy. Callahan stammered, Mara, I didn't know the extent. She cut him off, voice like ice. You didn't ask, Ray. That's worse. You've got 1 week to prove you're clean, or you're gone. The call ended in stunned silence, the execs scrambling to cover their tracks. Mara knew some wouldn't survive the purge, she didn't care. Horizon wasn't theirs to bleed, it was hers to fix. Back in Rockford, she stayed late, walking the floor as the evening shift clocked in. She pitched in, loading boxes, troubleshooting a scanner, showing the crew she wasn't above the grind. Keisha sidled up, smirking. You're sticking around, huh? Mara grinned, wiping sweat from her brow. For now. Gotta earn my keep. Keisha laughed, a real one this time, and handed her a crate. Welcome back, boss. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Audits uncovered rot in 3 more warehouses, managers sacked, policies rewritten. Back pay hit accounts, sparking tearful calls to Mara's new hotline from workers who'd thought they'd never see that money again. Javier's sister got her meds, Keisha paid off a looming bill, Hank bought a new coat for the winter. Mara hired a warehouse veteran, Lila, a tough-as-nails woman who'd risen from the floor, to run Rockford, and the place started humming with purpose, not dread. It wasn't perfect. Trust took time, and the scars of exploitation ran deep. But Mara was relentless. She split her days between Chicago and the warehouses, sleeves rolled up, digging into the muck she'd let fester too long. Horizon stock dipped briefly as the shakeup hit the news, but customers rallied. Stories of her undercover stint went viral, painting her as a CEO who cared. Profit steadied, then climbed, built on a foundation stronger than ever. One evening, months later, Mara stood on the Rockford dock, watching a truck pull away under a bruised purple sky. Javier approached, his uniform fitting better now, his eyes brighter. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. She shook her head. "Yeah, I did. This company's mine, but it's yours too. I forgot that for a while." He smiled, small but genuine, and headed back inside. Mara lingered, the wind tugging at her blazer. She'd torn Horizon down to its studs and rebuilt it, not just for profit, but for the people who'd kept it alive. It wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, she felt like the woman who'd driven that beat-up van through the snow, hungry, fierce, and unstoppable.